I'm Elaine Patrick Shelley, and it's my pleasure to welcome you Book Passage today, and particularly to welcome this magnificent author of this book that is so moving and poetic, really. But I am not going to introduce him because, for a number of reasons, one of which I'm so moved by this book I would screw up the introduction. But the other is that we are honored today that the Swedish Consul General, who works so hard for understanding between our countries and our community, Barbara Osher, is with us today, and I've asked her to introduce our author. Thank you.
Sweden is a very big country, but not with a lot of people. It's actually bigger in size than California, but with a fraction of the population. 9.1 million people, so not very many. But some of them get to be world famous, at least in Sweden, maybe also all over Europe, and now on the way to become world famous in the US as well, and that is Goran Rosenberg. A close friend, much younger than I am, and that delights me to have a foot in the younger generation. Goran has a long and distinguished career in all media, I would say. He's been a foreign correspondent in Washington in the 80s. Worked for television. He was basically the founder, or Moderna Tider, Göran, was that where you founded that?
I founded that, yes.
Fantastic magazine for very cutting-edge questions of the time, now defined sadly enough. But he has also a long, distinguished career as an author. He's written about Israel and many other topics.
United States.
And United States, but that's where we are, Göran, okay? You definitely wrote about the United States, actually a great book. But every book by Göran is resoundingly great. This book that he's going to talk about today is a very personal story and very compelling. Bring out your handkerchiefs. It's a pleasure to introduce Goran Rosenberg.
Thank you so much, Barbara and Elaine, for putting on this show for the second time. I was supposed to come here in April. I was on the East Coast. I was basically on my way to the airport to go here, but then I got some sad news and I had to break off and go home. And this is, in the business, this is old hat, and this came out in the spring. And to come here and talk about it in November is an honor, a privilege. I'm really grateful. Thank you so much. Well, what can I say? This book has now been with me in its printed form for some years now, and it has been with me in its unprinted non-form for most of my life. I must say this. If there was any book I was supposed to write, and I think if there was a story that I knew I had to write, then it was the story that eventually became this book. And that was an idea that came to me long before I knew that I could write a book, long before I had written a book. And sometimes they say that every author has one story, and if it's a very skilled author, he can make zillions of books out of that story. I don't know, but I think there is something to it. There is something in our biography or history that directs us towards a certain field of activity, and when it comes to writing, I would say that all my books previous to this one were somehow exercises in this book, even if the topics are as diverse as Barbara mentioned, and there are some other books as well. And there is a little trick to see that in all my books almost. That all my books start at the same place. At that little place where I grew up in a small town called Södertälje, which is an industrial town outside Stockholm, which is the capital of Sweden. If you read my book on Israel, it starts in Södertälje. If you read my book on the United States, it starts there. And it basically are attempts to start this story, but of course veer off immediately in other directions, because I wasn't ready to write this. And eventually people came to ask me, why didn't you continue that story? Well, it was 10 years ago, I decided that if I didn't continue there, this book would never be written, and I would die unhappy. I'm not saying I'm going to die happy now, but happier than if I hadn't written this book. This book is an attempt to recover my father. This is what this book is all about. This was a book that was written with the intention that I get to know again the father I had when I was a child. I don't want to say how this book ends, but it ends in 1960. So this is a book that in time is limited. And as you can hear from the title, A Brief Stop on the Road from Auschwitz, it's about the time after Auschwitz. And it's about my father's time after Auschwitz. And it's about the child that I am in that time of my father. Well, that's a bit cryptical there, but that's a childhood memoir where I try to, or at least that was my intention with this book, to get as close as possible to this man. And the only way for me to get close to him, the way I wanted to do that, was to become a child again. Because that was when I had him. And I wanted to recreate the gaze of the child and to see that man. And the reason I wanted to do that was that he disappeared out of my life, and in a way I cut off that period of my life effectively. Some people sometimes must do that in order to go on. My mother had to do that, and I had to do that. And in 1960, that time ended. So how do you do that? How do you revive a person with the eyes of a child? That was the challenge of this book, and this is what this book is. Everything else in this book, and people have, of course, asked me what this book is all about. Is it about the Holocaust? Is it about Sweden after the Holocaust? Is it about how to survive such a thing? It's all that, but it's in its essence a book about a child and his father, and everything else follows from that. And it is written as those who have read it know. It's written as a child talking to his father. At the same time, and I have to emphasize that it won a literary prize in Sweden. It's literature, right? No doubt. I want it to be literature, but it's a non-fiction book. And non-fiction here I want to emphasize because it's important to me. It was important to me. I think it was even a kind of a principal standpoint for me, that when I write about my father, no one should be able to say that I invented this, that this isn't true, that he, if you want to make a person come true again, you have to be as true as you can to what you know. So I had to discard basically the temptation. There is a temptation to write fiction. So there is no dialogue in this book. My father never talks. You will never read his thoughts in this book, so I don't know them. Luckily, and that was after almost I had started writing, not knowing if I had material enough to do this. I get this wrinkled plastic bag from my mother with, old letters, yellowed paper, that was the letter. There were the letters that my father wrote to my mother when he discovered that she was alive. Both had met in 1940 in the ghetto of Lodz or Łódź. I don't want to go in the whole Holocaust story, but they were both Jews from Poland. Lodz, Łódź. They were together in the ghetto of Łódź, Lodz. Lodz is what I heard when I was a child. That's Yiddish. Łódź is Polish. So I will say Lodz. And they were deported to Auschwitz in 1944 and then separated at the ramp. And the families of both, all of them, with some exceptions, were killed. And they, of course, went different ways. And when my father found out, after having come to Sweden, eventually, that she was alive, then this letter exchange starts. And those letters I got, these love letters, and of course that changed very much. Suddenly I got his voice again. Not only the voice that I heard, that I could remember, but also his voice in a different way. So this is a book about a child trying to get to know his father. And I would say it's, in one sense, it's a failed attempt. Because I had imagined that I would, as a child, discover much more about him by recreating or trying to memorize, to go back to my childhood memories, and an excavation that I do in memory, really. And to discover, to see who he was. But the fact is, I didn't see who he was. You couldn't see that as a child. As a child, I saw this handsome, warm, funny man and very energetic. And I didn't see all the other things that I knew were there. Of course, I know he came from Auschwitz. He was a survivor. He was coming with terrible things in his backpack, and I didn't see that as a child. There are a few. So large parts of these books are the result of deep research. Of course, I had to do that. I had to travel. I had to interview. I had to go to archives. I had these letters. I had, everything you have to do to build a person. But there are a few moments in this childhood where I could somehow feel that there was something that wasn't common in my parents and my child. We didn't have a past. All my friends in this little place, they had grandmothers and grandfathers and this and that. And there was always a past somehow in the present. In my family, there was no past. There was nothing there behind. And there was also, I would say, a sense of urgency. I will come back to that somehow affected me too. A sense of urgency in the way that they went about living. I want to do some reading when I'm here because I think it gives you a little sense of what this book is about. And the beginning is my father coming to this little place in 1947. He has been in Sweden for 2 years, coming with the Red Cross from a camp in Germany in the summer of 1945. And then after a year, finding my mother, she comes to Sweden in 1946. And in 1947, they moved to this little place where I am born and where I grew up. And here begins what I would say is this project of survival that is basically what is the essence of the book. That what comes out of this book is what I see is a father, a man, trying to survive his survival. Without without me being able really to see that as a child. So I go about excavating this childhood of mine, and I will read you a piece about this place which for me is the beginning of the world. You know, like all children, you are born into a place, you connect with it, you put your first names, everything got a first name, and you see everything for the first time without those tired eyes that you get after a while, and you get used to whatever there is. And so the place to me is the place where I'm becoming, I'm going into the world. But for my father and for my mother, this is a place where they have to begin their lives again. They have lost that place, which I now have. It's not there anymore. It's not that it's not there physically anymore. It's not there physically. I mean, the people are not there, the place is not there. But it's not there in their memories. They cannot live with the memories of their childhood because it's too painful. This is my clear sense of my childhood, that there is a wall somehow between the world in which they live and try to go on and the world from which they came. So they finally decide to stop here in this little place, and I will read a little bit from this. What quickly binds them to the place is the child, who happens to be me. I don't want to exaggerate. No, sorry. No, I'm jet lag wasn't here. Here, sorry. I started to read too late. This is it. This is the place. This is where my word assumes its first colors, lights, smells, sounds, voices, gestures, names, and words. I'm not sure how far back a human being can remember. Some people say they have memories going back to their second year. But my first memories are of snow and cold, and therefore probably date from somewhat later, since I was born in October. But one thing I'm certain of is that even before the point where my memories of that first word of mine begin, it had already set its stamp on so much that even things I can no longer remember aren't forgotten either. This is the place that will continue to form me, even when I'm convinced that I'm formed myself. That's the difference between them and me. They have encountered the word for the first time in an entirely different place and carry with them an entirely different world. And for them, so much has already started and already ended. And it's still unclear whether anything can start afresh here, since a great deal of what they can't remember or don't want to remember, they cannot forget. For them, the colors and the shifting light and the smells and sounds and voices of this place will often remind them of something else, though they might not always know what it is. For them to be able somehow to make this place their own, they'll have to get to know it well enough and let it stamp them deeply enough so that sometimes it will be this place they are reminded of when they hear a freight train rattle past at night, or inhale the smell of fried herring in the stairwell, or walk under tall pines, or catch a whiff of tar and sea, or see rowan berries glowing in the fall, or look at their children. So this is also setting, I think, the scene for what I consider this gap between the child and the parents. And as I said, it was very difficult for me as a child to know anything or notice anything. And there are a few instances, and I try to recall them, and I'll read one passage so you will also try to get a sense of that anomaly that our existence to some extent was. One winter's day, okay, Sam. it's a horrible this English translation. I'm used to reading my Swedish, so this is a trick to find the right place. Occasionally something happens to thrust him back toward theirs, and their shadows momentarily penetrate him, and a sensation of darkness and cold lingers on. One winter's day, some children throw snowballs at their kitchen windows and shout Jews. It's at number 45, where the apartment is on the ground floor and the kitchen window faces the courtyard. We had moved there at that point. The boy hears the snow thump on the window and sees his mother's face go white. Utterly white and utterly silent. She says nothing. Not to the children outside, nor to the boy in the kitchen. Nor to his father when he gets home from the factory. At least not in the boy's hearing. When the snow melts at the end of winter, the marbles come out. In the place, marbles playing is a sign of spring. The monochrome stone marbles cost €1 a piece, and you can buy them at the tobacconist, and they make your trouser pockets droop and bulge. Some kids keep their marbles in a special cloth bag dangling from their belts, weighing against their thighs. There are shiny metal marbles and multicolored glass marbles too. They are better for shooting than the stone marbles because they are bigger and heavier, but they cost more and are therefore not so often put at risk. Some people always seem to lose their marbles and have to make do with watching or trying to beg money for more. Do with watching or trying to beg money for more. There's a lot at stake in a game of marbles, particularly in the game where the object is to hit the pyramid. The pyramid consists of 3 marbles pressed into the ground and another one balanced on the top. Whoever breaks up the pyramid gets to build it again and wins all the marbles that have rolled past it. There are several ways of cheating at pyramid. The most insidious is to press the base of the 3 marbles into the ground a bit too hard and a bit too deep, making the target area smaller and the pyramid more stable, and the top marble harder to dislodge. Such a pyramid, the boy learns, is called a Jew pyramid. He also discovers that there are marble Jews. A marble Jew is someone who makes a Jew pyramid, or picks up more marbles than he has won, or collects his marbles in a pile rather than playing with them, or someone who just happens to get in the way of a player's frustration or disappointment. Marble Jew is a general insult for the duration of the marble season. You goddamn marble Jew, usually. The boy is rarely called a marble Jew because he's a useless marbles player, always losing his marbles and rarely threatening or annoying anyone. But he goes ice cold every time he hears the word Jew in one combination or another. He knows that mom and dad are Jews, and that he and his little sister are too, and the Klein family on the other side of the railroad bridge, and Auntie Ilonka at the other end of the Rowanberry Avenue. And even if he doesn't know what it means, he knows it has something to do with the shadows. The shadows are, of course, an important part of who my father is in this book. And the shadows I have to excavate by other means than by observing him normally. Although both, of course, are there. And there is a part then in the book that really traces his way to Sweden, because that's where I can see what he brings with him. He brings with him, as I mentioned, this an experience that really makes him out of memory, out of the memory of a past that he cannot deal with or handle. And he also, which I think is very important to say in this context, and which makes also his life situation, and this goes for my mother also, she comes a different way. I better say this, because I will get the question, why did you write about your father and not about your mother? And I will say I decided to write about my father for many reasons, but many of the things that I say about my father when it comes to the shadows goes for my mother as well, of course. Anyway, the survival of the Holocaust, the survival of the camps, the survival of the things that I tried to detect, to trace in the book, puts a person in a situation which is perhaps in a situation which is really hard to understand. To survive this, you also have to survive perhaps the deepest humiliation that a human being can be subjected to. As you know, the Nazis, and that was parcel of the policy, was to totally humiliate their victims. So and the Jews were basically dehumanized. And if you went to the camps and to the slave labor camps, you were literally a number or even less. Surviving that meant that you came from a point of existence of zero when it comes to your self-esteem, to who you are, because you had been deprived of everything. You were worthless. So what I see in my father is this enormous desire or urge to restore his sense of value, self-esteem. And I think this goes for so many of those people who survived. This is what also means with surviving the survival. Another thing, which is more commonly reckoned with, is that those who survived something that they were not meant to survive, and they were meant to be killed, as you know, and most people were killed, is the sense of guilt, the sense that why did I survive? I didn't deserve this. Some other perhaps deserved it better. There is self-recrimination. There are all kinds of feelings that are very, very difficult to deal with for a person. And the effect of that, finally having realized that you are alive, everybody else is dead, is to justify that you are alive. Is to make, in your own eyes, and even also in the eyes of others, prove in your own eyes and the eyes of others that you're worthy of surviving. And I think that it's that what makes the story of my father, the way I try to tell it, in a way so dramatic. There's no drama outside, there is an inside drama. There is a man trying at any cost to justify his living. And you can see that from the beginning, as I remember, this intensity in everything that he does, the intensity with which I come in, the way they pay attention to the child. I'm the child, and that's part and parcel of this whole survival project, which I call it. And I think I'm pretty happy and pretty sane person, but I have lived with a family in which I think, and eventually my sister, were keys to survival for them, in a way that I don't think other children perhaps have experienced. And as I write at some spot here, I try to describe the room in which I grew up, this little small one-room apartment next to the railway station. And I'll just read this. There are some more of them. In this flat, the child takes up more space than the naked eye can see. Around the child, an expanding web of ambitions and plans. The little cardboard box of alphabet blocks, made and decorated by hand, is not just a toy, but also a project. And the perpetually changing letter combination that the child and the young man who is now his father lay out on the living room floor on those long Sunday afternoons form not only the words of a new language, but also the building blocks of a new world. The child shall make the place his own, so that a new world will become possible for them as well, is the project that rapidly fills the small apartment with its invisible inventories of dreams and expectations. After all, what the two new arrivals need is not a roof over their heads, but firm ground beneath their feet. And if the child can take root somewhere, perhaps they too, in time, will find a foothold. There is a part in this book where I describe the arrival of the survivors to Sweden. I normally talk about that at some length when I talk about the book in Sweden, because this is to some extent an unknown history. These few months of the summer of 1945, and Sweden, from being a country with no foreigners basically, decides to open their gates for 30,000, temporarily open their gates for 30,000 survivors from the camps, among them 10,000 Jews, mostly from Poland and Hungary. And it's also a story about how how you come to a country with absolutely a radical sense of homelessness, and I try to describe that in the letters. I use the letters to describe this enormous sense of being outcast in the world that these people, most of them, sensed when they came to Sweden, to a country which, as I said, had no experience or no wish to have any experience of having a large number of foreigners coming to them. And there are, as I said, Sweden received them nicely, I would say. And there are camps erected all over Sweden, reception camps, small wooden barracks in small places all over Sweden. And these mostly young people are there preparing for. First of all, they are given food and they are giving some medical treatment, and they are preparing for going somewhere else because they are not supposed to stay. So my father came to this place. First a small camp in one forest, and then another small camp in another forest, and then happens something in Sweden which changes Sweden, not only the life of my father, but the life of Sweden. It becomes a country of immigrants, and it takes only a few years. From not wanting to have them, to wishing to have them, to recruiting them for the labor for Swedish industry. And so that's, so only after half a year my father comes to a small town called Alingsås, where they have a textile industry, and there was no problem to getting work. And this is how Sweden, the Sweden that doesn't like foreigners becomes a Sweden that needs them. And so my father and some others actually are being made to stay. I'll read a little part from that. Alingsås, just to get a sense also. What I really want to do in this rambling thing is for you to get a sense of the state, or what my father and what people like him, what state of life, what state of mind they were in. I mean, it's hard to. It has to. I want to really be able to give the reader a sense of his situation. Life in Alingsås is life of waiting for answers that tarry. You know, they all want to hear who is alive, who is dead. They don't know anything. They don't know. And so these first months are really a torture for them. in the meandering stream of people who come and go on their way to somewhere else, in the restless motion between the shadows of memory and the glades of forgetfulness. Pension that's a pensionat, is located at Torggatan 8, which is about as much in the center as you can get in Little Alingsås. But for the people who come and go across its creaking floor, it's a place on the outskirts, or rather a no man's land between a world that is no longer and a world that is still unreal. A waiting place, in fact. A waiting place for a connection not yet established. Hardly a life you would call normal, if by normal you mean a life with a past and a future. It's hardly normal to wait for a connection that may not exist. At any rate, there is no given term for people in your category. The official documents are stamped Red Cross refugees, but refugees you are not. If only you had been. If only you had fled while there was time. But you didn't flee, you were transported, which is something else, particularly if the purpose of the transport is annihilation. You aren't immigrants either, not in your own eyes, nor in the eyes of Sweden. You haven't come here of your own free will or under your own steam, but again, by being transported. From one camp to another, from a camp in hell to a camp in the land of the vast forests, which out of a combination of magnanimity and guilt has offered you a temporary stop while you are waiting to journey on to somewhere else, and which therefore designates you as transit migrants, or repatriandi. For people who haven't fled and haven't migrated and have nowhere to be transited or repatriated to, and who are still waiting for answers that tarry, and who until further notice live a life without a past and without a future. There is no ready-made term and no ready-made policy either, which is hardly surprising. Whoever could have imagined that in the course of a few short summer months, Sweden would take in over 10,000 individuals for whom no ready-made category exists in the Swedish language. As time goes by, the term survivors start to be used, initially as a statement of fact, survivors as distinct from perished, but gradually as a category in its own right. A term for people whose main attribute is that they are alive, when in all probability they should be dead. It is not in the beginning also self-evident that they should be allowed to stay. I have to say that. There is a debate going on for a few months, and there are some quite, to me, disturbing quotes from large newspapers that say that they shouldn't be allowed to stay, etc., etc. But eventually, I think this is a time in which Sweden changes its character in a way. And it's hard to say whether the old Sweden thereby is buried and gone, I think. But the change is in the setup and makeup of Sweden is clear. As I said, my father was an ambitious man in the sense that he really wanted to make justify, as I said, his survival. And it's, to a large extent, a story about the will to live, a spirit of that is really it seems full of energy, and there are many stories that I try to tell about this. He invents a pickup thing, a thing for you know why the Beetle is on the cover, because he buys a Beetle in the 1955 and then you can wonder why a survivor of the Holocaust would buy a German car, but anyway that's the story. But he then invents, which is this is I have got so many letters after this from people who claim that they have this, but he invents this thing that you put on the back of the Beetle to put your suitcase on or whatever. And the Beetle didn't have a proper trunk. This had an engine in the back, and there in the front there was the gas tank, so you couldn't put much there. So and he did all these things. There is this enormous effort of him to cut loose, I would say, from the restrictions that he felt. But without forego anything, and I won't be too long, I will just say that the shadows that I'm talking about keep at him in a way that maybe shouldn't have had the consequences that they had in this case. But anyway, I will finish by reading a part from the chapter, the last chapter, beginning of it. In the local paper on January 24th, 1959, a thought for the day, as usual. On this particular day, a thought about the Jews. In the story of the Good Samaritan in the St. Luke's Gospel, Jesus wanted to show how wrong the Jews were in their hatred, and how unprecedented it must have been for a Jew to listen to Jesus, and how Jesus does what no other Jew would have done, namely follow the commandment of love and not that of self-love. Much later I find out that you are involved in a violent argument in the factory. It happens in the changing room, where you try to throw a punch at someone, and this someone slams you against the locker so hard you end up with a concussion. This someone had wondered out loud why a person like you was doing among the ordinary workers. Why someone like you was not busy lending money or living off other people. Said he'd never seen a Jew working. After the argument in the changing room, your headaches come more often. The headaches and the nightmares. Early one morning in May, I hear you calling unfamiliar names in your sleep. I don't remember the names, but your voice frightens me. It's not your usual voice, it's a child's voice, wailing helplessly through the wall between the living room and the bedroom where you both sleep. It's already light outside and I lie awake, waiting for the day to begin. Because it's the day the king's coming to visit the truck factory. And all the children of Södertälje have been given time off school to wave flags along the motorcade route. And I associate the sound of your voice calling out with the day I didn't get to see the king. On Thursday, May 23rd, 1957, the King of Sweden and the Queen of Netherlands visit Södertälje. It's a glorious late spring day, and just in the driveway down to the truck factory's main offices, the local paper counts thousands of children, all waving flags presented to them by Scania Vabis, as the king, that's the truck factory, as the king and queen drive past in a black dangler and get out onto a red carpet to sit on a royal blue platform, and the reception committee bows and curtsies, and the entire program runs immaculately. You stay at home that day. I also stay at home that day. Are we both ill? I can't reconcile the voice in the night with your light-hearted playfulness. You're generally cheerful and jolly, pulling faces to make me laugh, yodeling with your hands cupped around your mouth, tapping out rhythms on your teeth with a pencil, giving silly names to things that have no name. Kegel-meagel is your name for a fruit salad of oranges, apples and bananas topped with whipped cream. Kegel-meagel sounds the way it tastes, soft, smooth and sweet. Your invented names are all soft and rounded, with an L or a Le at the end. Maybe it's the affectionate Yiddish diminutives stepping in to soften the harsh language of Strindberg. I can hear them in the voice calling in the night. Nor can I reconcile your restless activities and irrepressible ambitions with your frailty and fatigue, and with the recurring visits to the doctor. As I attempt much later to piece together all the activities you set in motion, and all the projects you are planning. They can't all be fitted into the calendar. They trip over each other, overlap, squeeze each other out, as if not even the smallest chink of idle time is allowed to open up. Yet by 1947, you are already consulting Dr. Paul Lindner in Stockholm about your headaches, anxiety, insomnia, and paranoid thoughts. From then on, you go to see Dr. Lindner twice a year for a checkup and prescriptions for vitamins and sleeping pills. Ambition and anxiety competing fiercely with each other, year after year, and I don't see it. You don't let me see it. You don't let anyone see it. You are always so cheerful, Karin writes. Karin is a friend that I had much use of later. It's only much later that I see that shadows dogging your every step, threatening to plunge you into darkness if you drop the pace even slightly. It's only much later that I'm able to reconcile the voice in the night with a voice that so lightheartedly and playfully gives softly resonant names to components of my world. Let me finally say something about my own thinking. I should perhaps have done that earlier, I've been going on too long. About my own thinking when it comes to the reception of this book. I wrote this book as a very private project, if I may say so. It was a book about my father and myself, and really I didn't expect it to have a larger audience. It did. It became a big bestseller in Sweden. I think it's 220,000 by now in a small country like that, which means that most people have read this. And I wonder, or they know someone who has read it, or talked to someone who has read it, which means that there must be something in it, and that I did right, except that I think I managed to do what I set out to do, namely to bring my father to life in a way for myself. I think I also did bring him to life to the readers of the book, and to readers that had no connection with the fate, basically, of my father, the non-Jews, not people who really have that past. But I think by making him come alive like that, his fate became real in a way, and the human situation in which he found himself and what he had been through suddenly became a reality also to Swedes. And I've got hundreds of small letters from people who have read the book, and these are mostly small mini biographies of themselves. They suddenly start pondering their own lives and their own parents and their own childhoods and whatever, in a way that I think this book triggered. And let me just end that if this book has achieved this in a sense, that the thing we call the Holocaust, which has been so much named, and we use it every time, and I think it's very risk that it becomes abused or misused. But if it can trigger a sense of awareness of yourself, and what I would perhaps you will ask yourself, who would I have been in those circumstances? What would I have done? What did my parents do, by the way, in this period, which is also a topic in a way, the parallel between Sweden. And then I think it has achieved something, and then it has given me some thought about how do you write about things of this kind that we call the Holocaust. And maybe the way I wrote this book is one way of doing it and making this an experience again that has an emotional and a thorough impact on the reader of the book. I think I'll end by that. I'm sorry, I was a bit rambling today. I know, but I'll blame it on my jet lag, which is. But thank you very much. Are any questions? I'll just pick this up. I'll be happy to take it. Yes, please.
What's been your family's reaction to the book? Did your father, was he able to?
No, he wasn't able to read the book. That's part of the book that he is. No, my father passes. I don't want, as I say, I don't want to say exactly how it ends, but after 1960, I didn't have a father. My mother read it, and that was a bit of I was a bit apprehensive about that. I didn't know what he would do to her. As I said, not only my father had suppressed memory, my mother had too. She talked about things, of course, and now I've grown up and everything. But I noticed that when I really tried to get things out of her, there wasn't very much. There is a skeleton of a story, but there's no flesh and bones on it. And now I think I gave her flesh and bones on the story that she had suppressed. And that was a big thing for her. The reason I didn't come in April was my mother passed away in the midst of my US tour. But I think the book gave her 3 good years of living with a certain vindication of her own and my father, in a sense, giving meaning to her survival, which I think wasn't my intention either. But these things are bonuses when you write the book sometimes.
I have 2 unrelated questions. The book sounds fascinating. How does a person who lived through what your parents evidently did live through get to the point where they can love and care for and be funny with and comfort another human being?
That's a very good question. Did everyone hear it? No. How can people who have been through what my parents were at the same time be loving and caring and affectionate in the way they were? That I have to say. People ask me, how was it to grow up under circumstances like this? And I try to tell everybody I had a very happy and warm childhood. I had very good parents, very loving and caring. Partly, I think I answered the question. I think children to them was the center of their survival project, in the sense that children perhaps wouldn't appreciate very much if they had to say about it. But in my case, it was benevolent. It was nice. I have very good memories of it, and I had to cut loose from my childhood after my father died because it was too painful. Just so my childhood remained this little bubble of something that was gone. But the question is good in a very deeper sense, I would say, because people expect people who have survived for this horrible, this evil, to somehow become nice people or better people, or you who know, somehow they are expected to somehow have learned from their experience about the evil of humans. And this is completely wrong, of course. People who have been through what my parents were through are people that will never be safe, always be afraid, always have a sense of insecurity, suspicion of other people, suspicion of everything, basically, of society and its ability to exist. So, on one hand, I think that you are sure you can find cases that are not like my parents, that they were not able even to show love to anybody. There are such cases. It's a very complicated. So how do people who have been through this actually come out of it? But I also, the general conclusion, I would say, that people who have been through this total loss of everything, and also loss of self-esteem and loss of trust in everything, they become non-trustful people. They are damaged. And to some extent, perhaps their children are a little bit damaged by that too. And having said all that, I had these wonderful 2 young people as my parents, and they all the wounds and shadows and everything they didn't bring to me. They kept me out of that.
You mentioned that your parents experienced a lot of anti-Semitism when they arrived in Sweden and thereafter. How much did you personally experience when you were growing up
I didn't experience much, and my parents did experience. This thing were there. People believe that after the war, people would think that anti-Semitism somehow was so discredited that people would. This is not my experience. I think the kind of images that anti-Semitism has created of Jews, and they are deep in the culture. They are there as kind of I don't know, some background noise. It was silenced for a while, or it was kept under the cover, but it's always been there. I don't believe it's malevolent. Hitler doesn't come out of anti-Semitism. Hitler was a case that had its own reason. So I don't believe. Sweden is a country where I think Jews live a good life. Unless what you read in the papers compared to anything you could imagine in any country. But I think what my parents suffered more than anti-Semitism, and I don't think I make a big case out of this in the book. I don't. Actually, I read a few instances. What they suffered was loneliness, generally in their experience, in what they came with. We were in a small town. There was no one who understood who they were, where they came from. Even if they would have told them, people wouldn't have. There was either lack of interest, or they didn't want to listen, or they wouldn't really have grasped what they were talking about. This is so. I think this is what afflicted my father and I think my mother most, was this existential loneliness. I call it don't know what the English translation, språkförbistring, the barrier of language, and it was not the language, it was not the Swedish language, it was not the literal language, but the language of experience that they didn't share. And that was much more harming to them, I think, than any anti-Semitism, which was really not prominent in the public at all.
I think we have time for one last.
One last, sorry,
question.
we're going on. Yes.
Given the reception of your book in Sweden and the change in the demographics since the period that your book describes with your parents, how do you see that, what has changed so much that Sweden has now received the mass of Syrians?
Sweden, not only mass of Syrians, I can tell you Sweden today, as we speak, I saw there was a story in one of the newspapers of, I think Barbara showed it to me, 1,800 Syrians have been received in the United States. That's
absolutely
how many arrive daily today in Sweden. Well, not only Syrians from Afghanistan, but basically we are receiving now today people in the amount of 350,000 on a yearly basis. That is what we.
It's that generosity.
Well, it's an attitude that's. I've written a story about that. Why did Sweden become this not so suddenly actually, but during the post-war period, a generous country for immigrants and asylum seekers. I think time doesn't allow me to explain that, but it has to do, I think, partly with the other part, the darker past of Sweden. There was a need also to somehow manifest that Sweden was morally okay. So this started quite early, that Sweden became what we now sometimes joke, so it was a moral superpower in the 50s and 60s, staying outside of the Cold War, being neutral, and also showing this claiming to be adhering to basic human and principle of human rights. And this is very strong still in Sweden. Now we'll see when and how it will change, but compared to our neighboring country, Denmark, for instance, there's a vast difference in attitude in how to look at these things. Well, it's a crucial situation now, so we don't know how long this what will happen. There's so many people coming. So.
Thank you.
Thank you too. I'm sorry, I should have given, this is much more interesting than my talking. I should have I learned from this because I think your questions are so much more interesting. I actually love to talk more. Okay. Thank you so much.